On a cold, wintry November 7th, a high-ranking official sent from General-in-Chief Henry W. Halleck is making his way to the Army of the Potomac. This official is carrying two envelopes, which, once received, will change the trajectory of the war. One envelope is bound for Major General Ambrose E. Burnside, while the other is bound for the Army Commander, Major General George B. McClellan. Near sundown, the official reaches Burnside's tent, who is quite shocked to hear the news. Lincoln has chosen him to take over the command of the army from his friend. After leading the Army of the Potomac for over 15 months, McClellan's time at the helm has come to an end. It is now up to Burnside to pick up the mantle and defeat the shrewd Robert E. Lee, who has so far dashed every attempt made against Richmond. Despite the first half of 1862 delivering a string of Union victories that captured large swaths of territory from the Confederacy, fall proved less fruitful for President Abraham Lincoln and his Republican Party. With the federal momentum waning, the Confederates used this lull to their advantage by taking the war into the unravaged northern states. In the east, McClellan fought Robert E. Lee to a standstill at the Battle of Antietam, a battle where he should have destroyed the Confederate Army, which barely escaped total defeat. In the west, General Don Carlos Buell narrowly staved off the destruction of one of his corps by Braxton Bragg's Army of Mississippi at the Battle of Perryville. Though both Confederate armies eventually returned to the Confederacy, the crisis caused by these incursions raised concerns about Lincoln's ability to handle the war. Coupled with the rising national debt, the introduction of the first income tax, and mass conscription proved too much for the northern citizenry to bear. Watching as the dissatisfaction reached a boiling point, Lincoln prods his principal armies into action in the waning months of 1862. Buell moves forward, but McClellan, even with his army mostly intact after Antietam, refuses to march after Lee. In early October, weeks after trying to get the army to move, the frustrated Lincoln travels to Sharpsburg to meet with McClellan personally in the hopes that he would take aggressive action against the wounded Army of Northern Virginia. Yet, despite multiple entreaties from various government officials, even with Lincoln showing up in person, McClellan refuses to move. The only action McClellan takes is to caution a crossing of the Potomac and berate Washington for more men. This refusal to move, in the height of the campaign and season, leads General-in-Chief Henry W. Halleck to write, "The long inactivity of so large an army in the face of a defeated foe, and during the most favorable season for rapid movements in a vigorous campaign, was a matter of great disappointment and regret." Meanwhile, across the Potomac in Virginia, General Robert E. Lee is working on rebuilding his battered army after its life-or-death struggle at Antietam. Though initially considering a return to Maryland to achieve the elusive goal of a decisive victory on northern soil, Lee calls off his plans after witnessing the very spirit that catapulted his men into the north weeks before to be non-existent. His men, who have restlessly campaigned and fought since the signal days on the peninsula back in March, have had enough. Now back on southern soil with no imminent battle on hand, Lee's tired foot soldiers dig their heels in. Rationalizing the halt, Lee writes to President Davis, "I would not hesitate to make it even with our diminished numbers, did the army exhibit its former temper and condition. But as far as I'm able to judge, the hazard would be great and a reverse disastrous. I am, therefore, led to pause." However, even though his infantry is tired to the bone, Lee also makes some moves with his cavalry to keep the Federals on their toes. Wanting to disrupt McClellan's rear as much as possible, Lee dispatches Major General Jeb Stuart and 1,800 of his troopers on a raid towards Chambersburg on October 10th. For the next 3 days, his men destroyed vital infrastructure, paroled 280 men, captured 1,300 horses, and plundered numerous depots. Finally, on October 12th, Stuart, without a single man killed, returns to the army bearing a hero's welcome. On his second ride around McClellan, Stewart and his troopers rode 126 miles completely around their immobile enemy without facing any form of resistance, much to the Federals' embarrassment. Once again, McClellan's failure to be proactive in the face of Confederate aggression is slowly eroding the last few vestiges of patience the president has left. By October 13th, Lincoln's indolent general is starting to create political problems with his military inaction. Trying his best to prod his stubborn general forward, Lincoln knows that if no action is made on the military front, his party's majority in Congress could be at risk of being taken by the Democrats in the upcoming midterm elections. Despite his lackluster efforts since Antietam, McClellan's position is safe, as he, just like Buell out west, are both Democrats. With the midterms less than a month away, booting either general from command will result in their partisan stuffing the ballots against the Republicans. In a cruel twist of fate, Lincoln's ability to keep his Republican majority in Congress relies upon pro-war Democrats commanding his armies. With all hell about to break loose in Washington, there is at least some good news reaching Lincoln's desk. On October 22nd, the day before British Prime Minister Lord Palmerston is scheduled to meet with his cabinet, he receives word about Lee's inconclusive fight at Antietam. Wanting to ensure they would be back in the prospective winner of the war, the news of Antietam leads those who support intervention to pause their lobbying. Realizing that the South's victory over the North seems less favorable, Lord Palmerston decides to continue the role merely as an onlooker for the near future. Yet, any hopes the Southerners had left for intervention would be quashed as Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation will strictly define the war for the liberation of slaves, not just the reunification of the nation. In a world with slavery on its way out, no civilized society would dare ally with the Confederacy. Just as Lee predicted months ago, the Confederacy will have no allies in this conflict and must fight the war itself. After 5 weeks of rebuilding his army after the staggering Battle of Antietam, McClellan finally gives the order to march out at the end of October. With Lee's army stationed in the Shenandoah Valley, McClellan plans to skirt east of the Blue Ridge Mountains and march directly towards the undefended Confederate capital. In this maneuver, McClellan hopes to block Lee from Richmond and force him into an unfavorable battle. While the Army of the Potomac marches south, McClellan plans to change the supply line to the Orange and Alexandria Railroad for a safer route connecting straight to Washington. A similar route that many will remember from their time under Pope during his Northern Virginia campaign. On October 26, 1862, the 100,000-strong Army of the Potomac leaves its camp at Sharpsburg and marches south, crossing the Potomac at Harper's Ferry. The army makes a beeline straight for Warrenton. While it moves south, the Federals man the gaps to ensure that no surprise Confederate attack will be launched from the valley. By November 4th, Warrenton and the railroad are both in Federal hands, allowing for supplies and reinforcements to arrive. Elated at the somewhat easy march south, McClellan writes to his wife, "We are in the full tide of success, so far as it is or can be successful to advance without a battle." But just as McClellan's movement south seems to be going well, the general halts the army. 2 days after McClellan set the Army of the Potomac in motion, Lee follows suit with Longstreet's right wing. Leaving Jackson in the valley for a potential flank attack, Lee and Longstreet rushed south to block McClellan's approach to Richmond. On November 4th, the same day that McClellan reaches Warrenton, Longstreet reaches Culpeper Courthouse. Once south of the Rappahannock, the Confederates spread out to cover the crossings. While the Confederates wait for McClellan's next move, Lee receives news that Congress has approved the establishment of a course system for the Confederate armies, allowing Lee to fix the problems that have arisen due to his ineffective wing system. With the authorization from Congress, Lee issues Special Order 234 on November 6, which reorganizes the 78,000-man, 275-gun Army of Northern Virginia into 2 corps. His 2 principal commanders, Major Generals James Longstreet and Thomas J. Jackson, are both promoted to Lieutenant General, and their wings are refurbished into corps. Infantry regiments are shuffled around to eliminate mixed state brigades, promising officers are promoted and divisional batteries are formed. Lee hopes that with this new organization, it will provide efficient growth, discipline, and supply for his army. With winter knocking on the door, supplies will be an acute problem that the Confederates will have to deal with. It will be so bad that many men will go without blankets or adequate food as the temperature drops. Despite their supply problems, many soldiers swell with pride after seeing their army rebound exponentially after Antietam. One soldier even goes so far as to say, "Our army is very different from the naked, barefooted handful of gallant men who held the field at Sharpsburg." With the Confederates guarding all the fords across the upper Rappahannock, McClellan is forced to alter his approach and start probing for alternative routes. However, with the midterms played out and the Republicans retaining a small majority in Congress, Lincoln sees no future need for war Democrats, especially those who are not following directives from Washington. With McClellan once again frozen in the face of the enemy, Lincoln decides it is time for a change of command. Therefore, on November 5, 1862, Lincoln orders Halleck to relieve Major General George B. McClellan from command of the Army of the Potomac. In his place, Lincoln selects Major General Ambrose E. Burnside of the 9th Corps to take command of the Army. Burnside, just like his 9th Corps, is relatively new to the Army of the Potomac. Because of this, the Army is undecided about their new chief. Many men, mostly among the veterans from the peninsula, are saddened to hear that their beloved Little Mac is leaving. The rank and file are not the only ones sad to see their favorite general departing. Many of the gentlemen officers are overcome with emotions and bawl like children. While not surprisingly, the men who have served under Burnside are elated to hear that their commander is taking over the reins of the army. Though Burnside is now just assuming command of the army, this is not the first time Lincoln offered him the position. After the successful conclusion of his expedition to capture the ports on the North Carolina coast in the first half of 1862, Lincoln, impressed with Burnside's success, lack of any apparent political ambition, and Republican affiliation, offered Burnside command of the army in July, following McClellan's failure to capture Richmond in the Peninsula Campaign. Yet, despite the rare opportunity to lead the North's principal army, Burnside ultimately decides to reject the offer due to his loyalty to his friend and an understanding of his own lack of military experience. However, after the crushing defeat at Second Manassas and the disappointing stalemate at Antietam, Lincoln offered the position once again to Burnside following the Republican victory in the 1862 midterms. Burnside initially rejects the offer due to his personal obligation to McClellan, but is eventually coaxed by Buckingham, Lincoln's courier, when he informs Burnside that if he does not accept the position, it will go to Hooker. Distrustful of Hooker and his apparent narcissism, the modest Burnside reluctantly accepts command of the army. Burnside, unsure of how to fill in his new position, asked McClellan to stay for a few days to help him get acclimated to his new command. After a few days riding through the camps, McClellan's time with the Army of the Potomac comes to an end. As the general rides to his train, he gives one last rousing speech to his men before departing. "Boys, you have fought with me on the peninsula, and I know your worth. All I ask of you is to fight as well with General Burnside as you have done with me." Choking on his emotions, McClellan boards his train bound for Washington, never to see his beloved army ever again. Although often quarrelsome with both the civilian government and his fellow officers, McClellan was instrumental in raising, developing, and supplying the Army of the Potomac. Onlookers and government officials praised McClellan for his tireless drive for perfection, a trait that also proved very annoying in the face of urgency. First called up after the disastrous first battle at Manassas, McClellan turned around Federal fortunes by rebuilding the army defending Washington and launching an offensive against the rebels. During his first campaign, McClellan expertly drove his army to the gates of Richmond, but this campaign proved to many who he really was. A masterful logistician, but a timid battlefield commander. In the face of opposition, McClellan revealed himself to be slow and cautious, which was on full display at Antietam. These characteristics proved to be his ultimate downfall when Lincoln desired more aggression from his generals. Once McClellan is gone, Burnside gets to work shaping up his army for the upcoming campaign. Despite all the emotions McClellan received during his departure, the men have no emotions left to show their new commander. For an uneasy Burnside, he feels like he has to prove himself to the army, the country, and apparently God. Hours before McClellan was removed from command, the general ordered a reconnaissance against the river town of Fredericksburg and its railroad on November 7th. Captain Ulrich Dahlgren, the son of the famed naval ordnance officer, Captain John Dahlgren, is sent to lead the raid. On November 10th, Dahlgren's party nears the town and crosses the Rappahannock upstream. Luckily for the Federals, the Confederate pickets fail to watch the river above Fredericksburg and are surprised to see them ride into town. After a short firefight, the Federals retrace their steps and rejoin the army. The raid proved successful as it revealed the town to be lightly guarded, giving Burnside important information about its defenses. For the Confederates, especially the citizenry, it proved to be a worrying sign of a war headed their way. The army Burnside inherits is not the same army that fought valiantly at Antietam. Though through the hard work of McClellan, the Army of the Potomac's strength has risen to 122,000 men and 312 guns. Still, the rank and file are distraught, many officers tendered their resignations, and the War Department is demanding instant action against Lee's revitalized Confederates. Because of all these various problems, Burnside reorganizes the army into a simpler, straightforward command structure. In this chain of command, Burnside officially mandates a wing system that McClellan used during the Maryland campaign, but instead refers to them as Grand Divisions. Each Grand Division will be headed by a senior general and consists of 2 corps with its own complement of artillery and cavalry. However, the command lines will be extremely rigid, which will not allow for overlapping jurisdictions, a potential problem for commanders during the heat of combat. On November 14th, via General Orders No. 184, Burnside reorganizes the Army of the Potomac into 3 Grand Divisions. In the left Grand Division, Burnside combines Reynolds' 1st Corps and Smith's 6th Corps under the command of Major General William B. Franklin. In the center Grand Division, Stoneman's 3rd Corps is combined with Butterfield's 5th Corps under the command of Major General Joseph Hooker. Finally, in the right Grand Division, Couch's 2nd Corps is combined with Wilcox's 9th Corps under the command of Major General Edwin V. Sumner. Sigel's 11th Corps will remain at Bristow Station to guard the Army's right flank, while Slocum and his 12th Corps are left behind to defend Harper's Ferry from any incursion led by Jackson. With his army straightened out, Burnside gets to work planning his advance south across the Rappahannock. Because of the conundrum McClellan marched the army into, Burnside has only a few routes left to Richmond to use in his upcoming campaign. With the first wintry blast already coming in, Burnside will need a line of approach that can be easily supplied and safe from Confederate raids. With Richmond as the objective, heading west into the Shenandoah Valley is not an option. Thus, Burnside is forced to choose between marching directly at Lee or swinging around to the east of Fredericksburg. If he intends to attack straight on, Burnside reasons Lee will simply retreat, letting the Federals overstretch their supply lines while waiting for Jackson in the valley to deliver the coup de grace to his rear. Because of this, Burnside's last and best option is to swing east through Fredericksburg, a plan that McClellan has been formulating before his removal. Burnside can use this Rappahannock River town as a springboard for his drive against Richmond. At the same time, utilizing the former Federal depot at Aquia Landing and the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad to supply his forces. Along with the railroad, Burnside requests a pontoon train that can bridge the river in 3 locations. This will ensure he can get the army over the river in a timely manner. When Burnside brings his plans to his subordinates, the majority agree that Fredericksburg is the best route for the army. Once word gets back to President Lincoln, he's quite satisfied to have a general who's shown conviction and an eagerness to march toward the enemy. Despite a desire for the army to go down the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, Lincoln nonetheless approves Burnside's plan and urges his general to move with great speed. On November 15th, with his army concentrated at Warrenton, Burnside leaps into action. Starting his army off early, the Federals bombard the sleepy Confederates on the south side of the Rappahannock. This unexpected attack startles the Confederates, who rush to their positions. Without Jackson on hand, Lee knows that Longstreet will not be able to hold off the entire Army of the Potomac. With this in mind, Lee pulls Longstreet off his Rappahannock line and rallies his corps at Culpeper Courthouse. Expecting the Federals to cross the river, Longstreet cautions his troops to be ready for combat. Yet, Burnside did not act as Lee expected. Instead of crossing the Rappahannock in force near Warrenton, Burnside races east towards Fredericksburg, fully knowing his ruse will not last long. Before cutting contact with Washington, Burnside requested an update on his pontoon train, but to his detriment, the general does not receive any information regarding its departure. The lack of news makes Burnside uneasy about his movement. If he reaches Fredericksburg before the pontoon train arrives, his presence will signal to Lee his intention to cross. This will give the Confederates time to build up their defenses before the Federals can attack. Despite the lack of news regarding his pontoon train, Burnside drives his army onwards in the pouring rain. On November 17th, after 2 days of marching, the Army of the Potomac arrives opposite Fredericksburg. The local garrison, surprised to see the Federal Army on the opposite bank, burns the bridges, preventing any easy crossing. With the crossings destroyed and the Rappahannock swelling from the incessant rain, the river has become impassable. Much to his chagrin, Burnside is forced to wait for the delayed pontoons while hoping the Confederates do not block his advance. Agitated, Burnside complains to Halleck, "I cannot make the promise of probable success with the faith that I did when I supposed all parts of the plan would be carried out." While the Army of the Potomac is concentrating north of Fredericksburg, Lee waits to see where Burnside is heading. Though Fredericksburg is a logical point to cross at the lower end of the Rappahannock, the lack of activity in the area troubles Lee. But as more reports filter in about Federal activity near the town, Lee finally orders his army east to block Burnside. Expecting the Federals to cross the river quickly, Lee only dispatches half of Longstreet's corps to delay Burnside, while the rest marches for the North Anna River. At the same time, Lee finally calls on Jackson and his Second Corps to hurry across the Blue Ridge Mountains to assist Longstreet. Lee hopes to defend the North Anna with Longstreet's First Corps, while Jackson arrives to strike Burnside's flank as he marches from Fredericksburg. However, just as Lee nears the North Anna, he gets reports that Burnside has not crossed the Rappahannock after all. With this in mind, Lee redirects all his troops to Fredericksburg to delay Burnside for as long as possible. By November 20th, Longstreet's First Corps arrives in Fredericksburg and takes up defensive positions on Marye's Heights west of the town. The next day, Brigadier General Marcinna Patrick, Burnside's provost marshal, calls on the town to surrender. After meeting with a delegation sent from Lee, the town refuses. Despite not surrendering, the Federals agree not to bombard Fredericksburg unless first fired upon, sparing the citizens for the time being. In the stalemate, Lee quietly garrisons the town with Barksdale's Mississippians, who hurriedly evacuate the civilians. In the Shenandoah Valley, Jackson starts his 200-mile march to Fredericksburg on November 20th. Marching up the valley to New Market, the general turns his Second Corps east and crosses through Fisher's Gap. By November 24th, his Second Corps has crossed over the Blue Ridge and moves east towards Madison Courthouse. For the next few days, Jackson allows his weary foot cavalry to rest. On November 27th, Jackson receives wonderful news that his wife Anna has given birth to a girl, whom she named Julia. At the same time, Jackson considers striking Burnside's right flank, but due to the unpredictable weather, Lee compels his general to reunite with the army west of Fredericksburg. Finally, on December 1st, after marching for 12 days, the army in Northern Virginia is reunited once again. With Longstreet defending the town, Jackson spreads his Second Corps to cover the crossings downriver from Fredericksburg. While Lee is gathering his forces to confront Burnside, the delayed pontoon train finally arrives on November 25th. Though initially angry with the War Department for the delays, Burnside decides to bite the bullet and focus on his campaign. With the pontoons present, his base built, and the railroads running, Burnside now turns his attention to crossing the Rappahannock. He considers crossing above Fredericksburg, but the canals present a formidable obstacle for any approach. Sumner, who's acting as Burnside's second, cautions his general not to cross at the town right in front of the enemy, which he argues will result in great loss of life. Sumner goes further to tell Burnside to look below Fredericksburg for their crossing point. Studying the maps downriver, Burnside eyes Sinker's Neck, a section of land that the Confederates neglected to guard. With no potential threat opposing the crossing at that location, Burnside briefs his subordinates on December 3rd on their attack on the 5th. To support his movement, Burnside calls on Commodore Andrew A. Harwood and his Potomac flotilla. However, the next day, Harwood's flotilla steams upriver near Sinker's Neck and tips off the Confederates with their presence. When the day of the movement comes, Burnside learns that the Confederates are aware of his upcoming attack and has to call it off. Set back once again, Burnside goes back to the drawing board on December 6. Unable to strike either of Lee's flanks without a surprise, Burnside looks for the next best place to gain an advantage, which happens to be Lee's center. Considering that Lee must have bolstered his flanks due to the recent probes, the center between Longstreet's and Jackson's corps, located at Fredericksburg, must be thin. If he can concentrate his forces in the middle, he can split Lee's army with a determined assault. Thus, contrary to Sumner's caution, Burnside opts to launch an attack directly at Fredericksburg. On December 9th, Burnside convenes a council war to inform his subordinates of his plan to attack Fredericksburg directly. Burnside reasons that the weakest point of any army is the seam where the two wings meet, and in this case, right where the town stands. With the Confederates concentrating their forces on their flanks, they'll be unprepared to meet such an unexpected attack. Regardless of these reasons, Burnside's subordinates balk at his plan, leaving the meeting disgusted. Despite the lack of support from his subordinates, Burnside sets the wheels in motion on December 10th, ordering up the pontoon trains and the infantry to be ready for the next day, while also ordering probes on the flanks to distract the Confederates from his true intentions. Pushed up against the wall by the weather in Washington, Burnside is forced to undertake a desperate action before 1862 comes to a close. Therefore, on December 11th, 1862, Burnside will cross the Rappahannock and attack, directly in the middle of the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia. This will result in one of the largest and consequential battles of the American Civil War, the Battle of Fredericksburg.